Keiichiro Toyama is a director and game developer that I have followed throughout his career by playing his games, some of those being Silent Hill, the Gravity Rush series, Siren, and who can forget International Track and Field. And anyway, so when I heard he was attached to a new game, I was immediately interested, and a horror game at that. I was for sure going to buy this game no matter what, because I needed to play it. I've always loved Toyama's output and what he's given to the gaming world at large, so I was excited for that. And that game happened to be Slitterhead. And Slitterhead, which I have here, I have actually the Day 1 edition. It's like in a big box. We'll look at the box in a moment. This is a 2024 action horror title, and it's developed by Bokeh Game Studios. And Bokeh was founded in 2020 by Toyama after he left Sony, being there for 20 years developing games. So Toyama, he has a passion for photography. He always has a camera on him, just loves capturing those moments and living life day to day, but having the opportunity to revisit them as well. It's kind of like having a time capsule almost. So he chose the name Bokeh just as a way of expressing a love for photography in the work that he does. And Toyama really started the studio with the purpose of narrowing in on making weird concepts, unique games for smaller audiences. What was happening at the time at Sony was that every game needed to have a wider scope, a bigger audience, so that, of course, you could draw in more sales based on that. But Toyama doesn't really operate in such a way, so he was looking for opportunities to move on and do something that will allow him to keep developing the games that he wants to make, even if they're not made for every single person who wants to buy a video game, And this studio is very cool. It's made up of members of old teams and people that Toyama has worked with for decades sometimes, which is pretty cool. A lot of people coming over from Gravity Rush with Toyama. And, Toyama naturally drifted toward a horror title for his first game because he really liked exploring and questioning the safety of our peaceful everyday lives. It's something that is a recurring theme in a lot of his games, and one that he wanted to approach here yet again. So he brought on Junya Okuda, who is the game director for Slitterhead, and Okuda has worked with Toyama since Forbidden Siren, the original, came out, and he shared that Slitterhead felt like a reinterpretation in a lot of ways of Siren's initial concepts. So even things like sightjacking, which is an ability in the game, or transferring your player character into the bodies of others, are kind of callbacks to some of those original games. So did find all this history to be quite interesting, and during the development process, the studio focused a lot on creating a balance between action and horror, and generating quiet moments that would create a sense of horror, and encouraging gamers to engage with the depth of mechanics present within Slitterhead. And as far as their inspirations went, you'll play this game and you'll realize right away the team was inspired by the looks of Kowloon's Walled City and Wong Kar-wai films, if you're familiar with him and his work, and the film Chungking Express especially, as well as some concepts from some manga like Gantz and Parasite, Tokyo Ghoul, of which I'm only somewhat familiar with Tokyo Ghoul, which seems to have inspired the narrative concepts in the game, where these Slitterheads, or the ghouls, are kind of hiding amongst society and feeding on humans to survive. So lots of interesting inspirations here, very interesting development history and kind of story about where this game came from. And when the game released, it achieved actually pretty mixed critical feedback. So the question is, did Bokeh really succeed on their goals and their objectives to launch this first title successfully with all of their inspirations at the front? And were the critics wrong? I mean, that's really the question I want to explore. So before we dive too much into that, let's just take a look at the packaging here. So I have the Day 1 edition of Slitterhead, as I was showing. It comes in a nicely finished cardboard box, so to speak. So here's the front. I love how just clean it is. I'm assuming this says Slitterhead or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. And I found it interesting that on the spine is just these phrasings. So like nesting in the red light district, or this one says bodiless Hyoki exposes the demon. So when it goes on a shelf, you can imagine it's going to be kind of interesting because unless you know the game, you honestly won't know what exactly it is. The back says, I must eliminate them all. Hunt down the brain-devouring Slitterheads lurking in the alley of this neon-lit city. Expose the demons nesting in Pleasure District. Possess humans in high-speed action and use the power of blood in thrilling combat. So we get a little bit of a descriptor, we get some images from the game, and then a little description as well of what's in the Day 1 edition box. So since I have it here, let's just go ahead and open it up. So the first thing upon opening the box is the game itself. And similarly, I really like the packaging here. We have one of the main characters in the game, as well as, well, a couple main characters here featured in the game. But the darkness with the colors kind of blooming out, I really like. Now, the spine on this sitting on a shelf would look very cool. So I'll have to decide how I'm going to kind of package that in with the rest of my collection. And on the back, we get the same kind of description as we see on the box. And when we open it up on the inside, we have the disc, which is again pretty cleanly presented, and a nice little poster, which is a pretty interesting poster, I guess. It's just really a piece of concept art from the design of the game when they were kind of working on it. And you can see within this art just really that claustrophobic, condensed nature that they wanted to present in the game Slitterhead. And I kind of find it funny because I can't tell what the medium was for this, but the resolution kind of makes me think PlayStation 3 game. Though when we get into it later, I didn't feel that was necessarily what the game was looking like when I was playing it. The other things we get in the packaging here is this is a soundtrack for the game. Very cool. I actually do want to pop this open because Akira Yamaoka did the soundtrack. And so I'd love to see what's all in here. The music of Slitterhead, I think that's pretty cool looking. And then we also get some concept art stickers as well. So here's some stickers. I think it might just be this one piece here. I have not opened this yet because of the next part, which I'll show you, which is the last thing we get, an art book. And this art book has a warning on it, and it's very thick. It's got a lot of pages in here. So very thick and heavy, so it feels like a very good quality piece of print. But right on the front it says, warning, the book contains spoilers for the game stories. Proceed with caution or complete the game first. So I have completed the game. I didn't open this up for two reasons. One, I'm kind of a freak about the perfection of the packaging of my games in my collection. But additionally, I had actually forgotten to open it up because I had just completed the game and then wanted to get on the camera and talk about it. So, and then otherwise, you know, we have the box itself, and it's a very nice piece of construction. I wonder how it'll hold up over the years to, you know, weathering and things like that, I guess. So let me just, I'll put this stuff together and then we'll get it up on the shelf, and then we'll talk a little bit about my experience playing the game. So, all right, here's the game. And then I don't know what to do with this big box. It's not really going to fit on the shelf, as you can see. Maybe I'll just put it right here on the side next to the game. And there we go. So yeah, Slitterhead. The first thing I want to discuss is the story. The story is always very important, especially in a game where concepts are really driving the momentum of the game. And in a horror game, story is often quite important for attempting to shore up a mediocre game and make it much excellent, right? So the story takes place in Kowloon, mostly in the red light district of Kowloon, where there are these sightings of crazy looking monsters called Slitterheads, and these Slitterheads have been observed killing humans. So you play as a spirit known as a Hyoki, and you have the power to possess people, and resultingly you can use their bodies for confronting these Slitterheads. The character you play as, specifically, his name is Night Owl. So during the adventure, Night Owl will encounter rarities, and these are people who, when possessed, have actually their body's not just possessed, but they have special powers and abilities which can be leveraged to fight the Slitterheads. So really from there, Night Owl discovers he can travel back in time, from which the player will then find themselves kind of crawling the span of a few critical days during the Slitterhead outbreak to eliminate key moments from occurring and keep Kowloon from kind of spiraling out of control under this Slitterhead invasion. And from there, the story gets even crazier. You start to get these time splits, these multiverse scenarios. You'll confront kind of the ultimate deities leading this outbreak. And, you know, I have to say, I found the story to be pretty interesting and weird. Definitely up until these later parts when such things begin to take such a radical turn. There is a nice delivery of information via dialogues that Night Owl will kind of have with rarities between each mission. And this information will inform you about who they are, where you're at in the game, and kind of clue you in on the next available missions, which I liked. There's a point where you're kind of jumping in and out of the same mission loops a few times, and the plot begins to get a little contrived, but I did like still that the in-mission character dialogue as well felt like I got pretty close to specific characters. One of the challenging things that I think the game encounters, and kind of pivoting on the discussion of these rarities, there's about 10 of them in the game, but really only 2 ever get truly fleshed out with deep character building and understanding of kind of what they're going through throughout the course of the game, and getting, you know, the opportunity to really shine. There's only a couple other characters who really get those specific moments in the story, and so I felt like what the team could have done is probably trimmed some of these back for the sake of the narrative. And if the focus was that we wanted to have these variety of skills accompanying these rarities, well, maybe take those skills and make them interchangeable perks that you can unlock over the course of the game. Kind of like you're playing COD multiplayer. You know, you choose your couple perks and then you move on. Now, I haven't played a modern Call of Duty game, so maybe they've changed that since COD 4. But that's how I remember that experience being, and so that's how I'll call back to it. Overall, a pretty interesting story. It gets a little contrived and hard to follow, but it's still clear enough, and they give you enough direction narratively throughout your conversations with the rarities, the little summaries that'll appear in each mission description, and so on, to kind of keep you on the path of what's going on to some degree. And I did find the ending to be acceptable and open up opportunities for interesting bokeh games to come in the future. So overall, the story was quite intriguing, if not a little funky at times. But the story, while an important aspect of the game, also the gameplay is just as important. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the gameplay in Slitterhead. So Slitterhead has a very interesting gameplay loop. In my opinion, you'll start in a hub menu, you can chat with your rarities, upgrade various skills or change out costumes for your characters, and choose your next mission. And these missions are spread across 3 separate days. As I was describing a bit earlier, you get a little summary of what the mission's purpose is, and then often some part of the path towards identifying Slitterhead's point of origin or defeating a notable Slitterhead within the community. So that's basically kind of what you're going to do for most of the game. You can choose 2 rarities to take on any of these missions. Sometimes they're locked to a specific character. However, usually what I tried to do is choose a support character and a more aggressive offensive character, so I could kind of balance out some of their skills and make my more challenging fights a little more manageable. So for instance, Alex is a rarity who can draw enemies into a single point on the map, and then he can use his shotgun to fire on all of them at once, which is super helpful. Or there's Tree, and Tree is a rarity who can draw enemies to an area by distracting them, or she can bind an enemy to her, and that'll slow down the enemy's movement. So you can quickly and easily play off of the skills of the 2 rarities you bring into the fight. And those skills will also be transferred, some of them, to the other people just kind of wandering around, the spectators and so on within each battle arena too. So I like the flexibility found in these skill systems, and while the game is not too trying, it did present some difficulty to me in terms of just giving me challenges where I said, oh, if I had this skill or this rarity, my life would be much easier right now, So the gameplay loop will have you possessing these people on a search for the Slitterheads, and so you will occasionally be chasing or sneaking around or exploring an area to find them. So I'll just break that out into a little bit further, I enjoyed the combat for sure. The basic encounter is just mostly you'll have your character swinging with a simple 1-2 combo or using some of the skills mentioned. And skills draw on health or spirit power to use, which health can be reabsorbed by pool bloods on the ground, pools of blood on the ground, or properly defending attacks will increase your spirit power. So it was kind of like a give and take, right? You want to use these skills. You also have to manage the health and I guess the mana, the spirit power of your characters as well. And I did like kind of the duality of that system. And the attacks themselves can be defended by visual notes and parrying on the screen before an enemy attacks. And I really found later game that getting comfortable with this system became an easy way to stay on the offensive most of the time. And after I unlocked a passive skill called Sixth Sense, I was able to see the timing for any mobs kind of coming at me and attacking me, not just specifically the enemy I was targeting, which made it a little easier to cheese this system later on and avoid getting hurt too bad in these fights. So if you wanted to be more strategic though, another great method is possessing other people found near the encounter area. So when you switch around between people, you can get a temporary boost in attack power and an increase in the number of hits of your combo. So I found that switching back and forth between two rarities or maybe other people around the area in a combat scenario often netted the best outcomes for these scenarios. And so I quite enjoyed that. So a couple holdbacks though, late game, most of these battles will evolve into large mobs that are super effective at just stun locking you into falling animations, which made battles feel a little clunkier than they typically were earlier on. And another thing that I encountered was that the game would have also benefited from a bit more variety, I would say, in the strategic options when fighting Slitterheads. So enemies don't have typings and they lack a variation in moveset. So kind of once you get comfortable and good at fighting one of the enemies, you're going to really be carried throughout the game in terms of that methodology, because there's only a handful of different enemy types that you'll face throughout Slitterhead, including some of the more quote-unquote boss battles where you fight the more notable Slitterheads in the game. So and the game ends, I would say, just before the missions begin to get too repetitive. So a few extra maps or maybe a few different objective types would have alleviated this. One thing I was commenting on earlier is that outside of the fighting, you'll have to chase Slitterheads around, and I found these to be pretty fun, but they're pretty small segments, of course, of the gameplay. The sneaking sections were about as simple as they could get. They're very scripted, and exploring areas to find the Slitterheads or to find bonus items and bonus challenges was intriguing, but again, there's only a select few maps where this is applicable, and those exploration areas are a little dense and challenging to just approach straightforwardly. So overall, I would say that what's going to be most important for me in a game's gameplay is that combat encounter. And so I'll be a little biased because I like Toyama and I recognize that this game was a little bit budget, right? But I did love the combat. I loved the variation in the skills and abilities that you had. I loved just fighting Slitterheads in general, and especially mastering that parry system that they had built. I thought it was a very unique way to kind of incorporate some of those action elements into such a horror game. So I had a lot of fun with that, and up until the end of the game, I was still enjoying kind of repairing rarities and skills and discovering how they all kind of function and work. And so I think this game would have benefited from some degree of replayability in terms of just giving you the bandwidth to really get to know these characters, max them out, while not feeling like you're just repeating content over and over again, right? So I had a really fun gameplay experience, and I did quite find the story to be intriguing. So let's talk about the other presentation aspects of the game, both visually and kind of auditorily, what this game does and whether it excels or not. So the first thing I want to discuss is the visual presentation. So the visual presentation for this game is great, in my opinion. The game has incredible looking environments and really great enemy designs. The Slitterheads just look grotesque and weird, and in certain cutscenes or transformation segments, I was really horrified at kind of how these Slitterheads were emerging from people. And Kowloon area itself that they've built, it's beautiful. It has great water effects, incredible neon parts in the games, and they really give kind of this grimy and claustrophobic yet vibrant contrast to the atmosphere. So I really loved the environment building and the world building that went into creating the visual presentation for Slitterhead. And the other thing I would say is that the game's world, while appearing large, you know, it is pretty small when you start familiarizing yourself with the levels. So amount of reused assets here is pretty high, and that does become a little immersion breaking later into the game. But for what they did craft, I did find it to be excellent, and I loved it. Another thing that's really important to me is kind of more the character modeling, the animation, etc. And I would say the character models are not nearly as effective at creating the beautiful world in which these characters live in. I think they look pretty good, but proportions are a little strange. So especially around the hands, I think one of the things that stood out to me the first time I loaded up this game is that I think the hands, there's only one hand model probably. And it's probably used that way in order to create universal look to the way that all of the various possessions and possessed people are holding weapons and things of that nature. So it just probably created some continuity in terms of working with the rigs that they had built for the models. But it does kind of come off funky looking, especially when you are possessing smaller characters in the game. They kind of end up looking like Disney characters with like giant oversized hands, and just something about that seemed rather odd to me, though as I progressed a couple hours into the game, I was able to look past it a little bit. But I did find that to be a little jarring the first time I booted the game up. Another thing I think that kind of persists across the game is that the animation work is pretty stiff. You know, whether you're in combat encounters, the characters very much are sharply moving left and right. They have like a very floppy looking animation to the run that didn't seem particularly realistic. And there are some other animations that I thought were okay, like jumping around on signs and things. But one of the things that is so important to me is that I love great animations. I love when they feel and look realistic and really bring me into the world. And when it's not that, it can be a little immersion breaking. And I did feel that from a lens of the character modeling and the animations of those characters. So overall, great visual presentation. I can see kind of where they began to put their budget into in terms of creating these aspects. And the world environment is great. And I just wish they had put a little more time and effort towards the animation in Slitterhead. So the other thing I want to talk about is sound. Sound design is really important in horror games. And even more so because Toyama has such a fantastic back catalog of games that he's developed that had great sound design. Overall, I love the sound design. It felt like this game had a strong sound effects design and presentation. So Slitterheads, they're all really cool and they have very interesting sounds. And they're accompanied by an incredible soundtrack by Akira Yamaoka. You know, he's one of my favorite composers. He's done basically all of the Silent Hill games. And he also has like DDR songs and things that he's worked on. So I just love all the music he brings to the world in which I live in. And I especially love the ambient tracks that weave themselves into the menus and Kowloon streets playing throughout the game. And this was a huge highlight for me as a result when I picked up Slitterhead. The one thing that is kind of missing here in Slitterhead is voice acting. So key characters in certain cutscenes, you know, they will have some voice work, but otherwise the game is quiet from a voice line perspective. You're going to be reading a lot of text. So this is more of a nice to have, I would say, not a must have. And for me, you know, the writing feeds me pretty well into the game already, but would have appreciated a little more dialogue in the voice work. Even if it was just like, you know, I've played some games, budget anime games, where they'll do voice work for the first line of a read, and then you'll read through the rest or something like that. I could have done with that. However, I will say that sometimes a game with no voice acting is going to be better than a game with subpar voice acting. So presumably this just really comes down to the budget that was available, I would guess. But while it was noticeable it wasn't there, it didn't necessarily affect my enjoyment of the game, right? So Overall, loved the sound design. I really appreciated the way the game looked, and I had a couple feedback points, but overall, I thought it was an excellent package, especially for a budget title released by a first-time game studio, so to speak. So, Slitterhead, it wasn't loved by all the critics. I can understand that. It had a small budget, so its scope was smaller. And for me, the concepts here, they're weird, they're intriguing, they're different, and you know what? We need games that are different, and I think Toyama is a person who can deliver. And so in 10 years, I have to imagine that there will likely be some revisionist perspectives on Slitterhead, giving it more of a positive bend than what critics initially said about the game. And I see that amongst user communities already. I mean, I think a lot of people are enjoying Slitterhead for what it is, and I'm happy to see that myself. So I hope that the game made enough for Boca to turn a profit and see that there is a worthwhile effort to invest in kind of moving forward and making more games, because that's exactly what I want out of independent studios. Toyama has a huge history behind him, but really that's what Boca is now. It's really a ground-up studio that just put out its first game, and I liked that first game. I thought it was a great time, and it was a little rough around the edges, but it did a lot of the things that I'm looking for a game to do. So from the moment I picked it up to the moment I completed it, I was having a lot of fun, and I think it's definitely worth checking out. And so I hope that my recommendation helps you consider whether you want to purchase Slitterhead. So if you have played the game, would love to know what you thought about it. If you had similar observations to me, or maybe you thought other things, would like to hear that, please comment below. And if you liked the video, please like the video and subscribe. Would love to have you join this community and catch up with me and see what games I'm playing every weekend. So, well, until next time, guys, stay well, stay healthy, take care of yourself. I look forward to seeing you again. All right, bye, guys.